So, welcome to Women in Wine Burgundy. We'll wait for Becca to come back actually, but I hope you've got a glass of wine poured. Have you all got red and white? Poor Elle, sorry, I didn't. Did you get a little sample?
Yeah, I got one.
You did.
Can we pour that now?
Yeah, you can pour your little mini sample. I've only got one glass, so I'm going to have to have my other one in my water glass. So welcome to Women in Wine, and we have done Burgundy. Some of you will have done some bits of Burgundy with us before, but we thought it was a really good time to sort of recap on it because we've just come to the end of Burgundy season. Some of you have very kindly bought some en primeur, and for once it was a really exciting campaign. It's always an exciting campaign, but this one was exciting for two reasons: because we had good quality and finally we had good quantity of stock. So you've heard us sort of bemoaning the fact over the years that there's been terrible frosts and hailstorms and drought and all sorts of things going on in Burgundy. So actually 2022 was a really nice vintage to sell recently. So you haven't got any 22s in your case because they're not here yet. So we've gone back to the most recent vintages, which were 2021 and 2020. So I thought I'd do a little quick, if I can drive my screen, quick recap on the grapes in Burgundy. So we're really looking at two absolutely principal grape varieties, which is Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But interestingly, on the wines that we've got, certainly the reds that we've got, we're also looking at Gamay, and only 3% of the grapes grown in Burgundy are Gamay. There's a little bit of Aligoté, which is a very high acid white variety. But really, for the purpose of knowing what you're talking about and feeling comfortable when you're in Burgundy, you need to be talking about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And I think we probably said this last time, but there are a lot of people who often say, in fact, we had two blind Chablis today in our white paper tasting, and we get a lot of people who say, I don't like Chardonnay, but I love Chablis, and they are one and the same thing. So remember that nearly all whites, unless it says Aligoté on the label, will be made of Chardonnay grape. So we're looking at this region. It's quite far. I mean, it's really quite cool region, Burgundy. You'll see from, I don't know if can you see my mouse here? Can you see anything moving on the screen? Yes, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so where I'm sort of spinning around here, this is the Chablis region. And that's, I mean, if you're a Chablaisienne, you probably would say we are not part of Burgundy. But to all intents and purposes, we always lump it in with Burgundy. It's nearly all white wines. In fact, it's pretty much all white wines. You'll often get, it's very cool, as you can imagine. It's quite far north. It's not very far south of Paris. Very close to Champagne, which is just up here. And it's a very cool region, cool climate region, and it's producing really lovely, racy Chardonnays. They use very little new oak, so what you really get in Chablis is the grape variety, and they mature most of their wines in stainless steel or old oak. So you just get this sort of lovely, pure expression of the grape. But what we're going to look at down here is the Côte d'Or, which is the Côte d'Or refers to the whole of Burgundy. Sort of, you could call it maybe the Golden Coast, or you could call it the eastern facing coast, because as you drive down from north to south, as you're driving down Burgundy, all of the vineyards are on your right hand side, and the slopes slope down towards the east. And as you go down, you go from north to south, you're really going from red wine to big red wine territory down into a mixture of red and white. And we're going to look at both ends actually at the moment. So at the beginning of the Côte, you have the Côte de Nuit. So we're separated into two regions. So you have the Côte de Nuit at the top, and that takes in mostly red wines, as you'll see here. Marsanne at the top, and then all the way down. Beaune is in this sort of central part here, the city of Beaune, and that sort of divides the two regions in half. So you have the Côte de Nuit at the top, and that's where some really famous names are. So Gevrey-Chambertin, you may have heard of, Chambon-Musigny. We're tasting in Nuit Saint-Georges, which is further down here next to Vosne-Romanée, which is where Domaine de la Romanée-Conti is, a very famous producer of incredibly expensive wines. And then as you go past Beaune, you go down into the Côte de Beaune, and that's where you get all sorts of fantastic vineyards that you would you'd recognize their names. So Puligny, Montrachet, Volnay, Meursault. Volnay is mostly red wines. Meursault is mostly white wines, although you do get the odd reds. Pommard, red wines. And these are all the sort of this is the Côte de Beaune. So anything south of Beaune in the Côte de Beaune, and anything north of Beaune is the Côte de Nuits. And then even further south, we've got the Côte de Beaune here. Even further south, you've got the Côte Chalonnaise, which is where some of your favorite wines come from. So things like Rouy, the really lovely, rounded, delicious, easy drinking reds and whites. Givry is actually can be quite tannic, but easy drinking. Mercury, really delicious, easy drinking Pinots and whites. And then you've got the Mâconnais, which is where Château de Fouissé is, which a lot of you guys know. Bourgogne, Famille, Vincent, JJ Vincent. That's where they come from. So right down in the south. And you've probably drunk a bit of Macron in the past. Delicious, really nice wines. Easy drinking. They go from very typical village wines, which are very light in oak, if any, really easy drinking, not expensive, up to wines that have the villages attached to the end of their names, and they're slightly higher up the slopes and slightly better quality. And they're trying to sort of differentiate themselves from the bog standard Macron, which is, which can be pretty bland. So if you're ever looking for a Macron in the shops, try and look for one that has a Macron, a village attached to the end of its name. So the wines look. Has anyone got? Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
I've only got half the screen on, so you probably haven't met half the guys. Let's do a quick intro. You probably haven't met everybody. So this is Sarah Gordon, who is Andrew, who works with us, or who's our leader. It's Andrew's wife, Sarah, and she's very much part of the business. So, and she's
hello.
So you will probably recognize a few faces and names on here from tastings, Sarah. So we've just done a quick gallop through the the wines that we're tasting today. So
it's lovely to join you.
Has anyone got Chateau Fouissé, the JJ Vincent wine, with them? Or is anyone tasting that one? I'm going to do just a quick spin through the properties that we've got in our box, and then I'm going to turn off my screen sharing so that I can see you all properly, because it's
Is the Famille Vincent then?
Yes, so Famille Vincent. So Famille Vincent, they're based down in the Mâconnais, so right down in the south, and they are the owners of Château de Fouissé, which is a really, really fantastic producer down there. And the way Napoleon, by the way, I hope you're all drinking a glass of wine, so please just tuck in. The way the Napoleonic laws of inheritance work in France is that if you own a vineyard and you die, very sadly, RIP, then your vineyard is then split equally, half to your spouse, if you have one, and the other half goes equally to your children, so in equal parts. So it doesn't go to the firstborn son or anything like that. It goes half and half, so half to your spouse and half divided equally to your all of your children. So as you can imagine, lots of people end up with lots of tiny little portions of vineyards. And the only way to really change this is to sell your vineyard to somebody else. So that's the only way consolidation is now happening, because Burgundy is a very small area, and they're not going to make it any bigger. They're certainly not going to make the appellation any bigger or any less exclusive. And they're only really planting on the best parts and the best soils. So the Vincent family ended up with everybody having just a tiny part of the vineyard, so a few vines here and a few vines there, and then we
can't you overrule that law and write a will and decide who you want to leave your vineyard to?
I think the only way to do it literally is to sell it. So because they have this inheritance law, so the only way to do it is to sell your portion before you die. So for example, Domaine de l'Arlo up in the north, in up in the north of Burgundy, is owned by AXA Millesine, the big insurance company. So they have gone about buying vineyards from people. I mean, they bought Domaine de Lalo, so they own the whole domain. And then as vineyards come up, they might be able to snap up. They've got plenty of money, so they might be able to snap up a vineyard as someone puts one up for sale. But land is land, you know, as my husband always says, land is land, don't sell it, because it's, you know, it's worth so much money. That a lot of people lease vineyards, and a lot of people, you know, they just come up for sale so rarely, and when they do come up, they've got a very high price tag. So what this family do is they decided, rather than all of them trying to make, you know, 20 different cuvées of the wine, they decided to club all their vines together, and as a family they make their Bourgogne Blanc as a family. So it's all the vineyards that are scattered around, owned by all the family. I guess these are some of the little, you know, siblings and children of the families doing the harvest. And that's what they do. So they make Chateau the Famille Vincent, which is it's their basic wine. It's their sort of entry level Bourgogne. We don't really go for really entry level priced wines, because they don't really taste of anything. So so when we're looking at these wines, they're you know, they're not, Burgundy's not cheap, but they are you know, these guys are making really good wine, and they're making fantastic wine at the top level. So you're getting all of the expertise of the Puy wines that they're making at Chateau de Fuissé in their Bourgogne Blanc. So I think it's a brilliant value wine. If anyone's got it in their glass, I'd love to hear what you think of it. And what grapes are these, everybody? White grapes?
It's a Chardonnay, but I'm drinking it.
If you like it.
Delicious. Yeah, really delicious.
I think this is also a really good wine to buy on Primeur, because it's about £4 a bottle cheaper when you buy it on Primeur.
Wow.
So when we sell on Primeur, we're selling it obviously before tax, before shipping. And we take a sort of punt on selling it to you before. So we buy the stock, and we take a punt on selling it to you before we ship it. And so it's a wine that we've always followed. But it does definitely save money buying on Primeur.
2021 was a good year, but there just wasn't very much of it. Is that right?
So the two, yes, thanks, Chloe, keep me on track. So the two, I did a little bit of work on this earlier. The two vintages we're looking at are 2020 and 2021. So 2020 was a really warm, lovely vintage, but it was really marked by drought. It was the first year that we could all go back to tasting after COVID. So Nicola was very excited to go out and meet all of our growers. She actually went out in, I think, December, possibly 2020, maybe even January 21. And everyone was really happy with their vintage. It started off as being quite warm, a little bit warmer than average. And so all the vines got sort of off to a really good start. You imagine your garden in a warm spring, and everything gets really overexcited. And that's where we start to worry in Burgundy about if it's a warm early start to the vintage, because everything races ahead and you get these lovely little buds on the vines, and then they have a massive frost and everything gets killed, which didn't happen in 2020. So that was the good news. But what happened was the year just carried on being warm, and then we had a very even growing season. And then in August, the temperatures were about 2 degrees hotter than normal. So everything sort of, again, all the grapes acquired quite a lot of sugar, and everything got quite, but what happens is when there's no rain, there was very little rain in 2020. I don't know if you remember that summer as being very hot. There was very little rain. So it was a year sort of marked by drought. And the vines, when they can't get enough water and they start struggling to get water, they tend to shut down. So they stop accumulating sugar, and they wait until there's a bit of rain to refresh it, and then they'll start again just to finish off their ripening. So 2020 was a really nice vintage. It had okay quantities, not massive because of the drought. The berries were much smaller. There was less juice in the berries, and so the yields were down, but they weren't down as much as they were in 2021. Where they had the most god-awful frost, and a lot of people ended up with 50% of their production. So if you get frost when your vines are budding, it's just terrible for them. And there are various ways that you can mitigate it. You can spray water onto the vine so it actually freezes on the buds and completely contrary to my general knowledge of physics. It's actually warmer inside the ice than it is on the outside. So that sort of protects the buds. That's what the method they use in Chablis quite often. Or you can dash around lighting candles. So you'll see beautiful pictures of vineyards with candles, all candle lit at night. It's normally like 3 o'clock in the morning. There's nothing romantic about it. They're big old paint pots with candles in. And it takes, you have to put them out by hand. So you can only protect, the most likely to be a frosted areas of your vineyard because it's expensive. They cost about 14 euros each or something, these candles, and they have to put thousands of them out. So they might do that. Or the other thing they do is often they burn hay bales, but that's really terrible for the environment. So it's a counterbalance. Do we want to have smoke billowing everywhere and causing chaos in the environment? Do we want to have candles which are really expensive? Do we want to install water sprays so that we can freeze the vines? They're even looking at heated trellising, which will keep but then they're saying, will that affect the microclimate of the vine? And is that against appellation laws? So all these things have to be approved by the appellation control people, and it's not an easy game. But the good news is in 2020 it was an easier game, and in 2021 they just had this drastic frost, which is why we saw prices going up. Well, one of the reasons why we saw prices going up so high in Burgundy. The other wine we have in the case, the other white we have in the case, is from the lovely Pierre-Henri Rougeot. So anyone who came to our Burgundy masterclass will have met Pierre-Henri. This is him with his dad. He's on the right, his dad's on the left, obviously. And they are based in Meursault, and you've got their Bourgogne Rouge, les Grands Gouttes. And again, very like the Vincent family, this is really the best way to really experience a good domain is to buy their Bourgogne Blanc or their Bourgogne Rouge. And the thing that the mark, so what you'll often get is grapes that that may go into Meursault, or they may go, or they'll be grown slightly lower down the slope. They'll be from different vineyards around. Les Grands Gouttes is a lieu-dit, so they'll be using grapes from a lieu-dit is a named vineyard. It's not a premier cru, but it's sort of slightly better than a village. A village wine is their sort of the first vineyards that you get to on the slopes. And then as you go up the slopes, you get to lieu-dit, little lieu-dit, and then you get to premier crus. If you have a Grand Cru village, you have a Grand Cru. And then as you get further up, you'll probably go back to premier cru, and right at the top, you might go back to village or nothing, because actually the soils at the very top of the slope are not really good for vine growing. And the soils at the very bottom of the slope are very fertile because you get all the erosion coming down the slope. And what we really want is for the vines to work quite hard and to struggle to make their fruit ripen and dig right down deep into the soil. Partly to find water, partly to anchor the vine. If you think of how tall a vine is, it's going to have quite steep roots to keep it up. So we want the roots to go right down into the subsoils to anchor the vine and get all the nutrients out of the soils. So the thing you need to know about Pierre-Henri is that he and his father are allergic to sulfur. So anyone who is sulfur intolerant or sneezes a lot when you drink wine, this would be a very good wine for you, because they use as little sulfur as possible in their winemaking. And sulfur is not a bad thing. It's an antioxidant, so it doesn't let oxygen get into the wine, which would ruin it. It's an antiseptic, so it kills all the bad bugs. Doesn't let your wine re-ferment if it's got any residual sugar in it. So it's a really good thing, and it just keeps your wine fresh. It's very limited, so its use is limited in the EU. So you can't add a lot of sulfur. There's more sulfur in your smoky bacon and your dried almonds and dried, apricots and things that we all think are so good for us, and there is in a bottle of wine. So don't be afraid of sulfur. But if it's something that you want to reduce, these guys, Pierre-Henri, he uses it when he needs to. He does actually make wines without any protection of sulfur, which is easier for reds because the tannins and the anthocyanins in red wines protect the wine from oxidation. But in the whites, you often need a dose of sulfur, or they mature very quickly because oxygen, as soon as you know, it's a living product. So oxygen, as soon as oxygen gets into it, it starts to evolve. He does use a little bit of sulfur in his Grand Gouttes. Has anyone opened that one tonight?
He has.
B has. Oh, yum. So I really love that wine. How do you like it, V?
You're on mute.
I know I am. Hi. Yeah, it's much sort of richer and darker than the first one. Completely different.
Mm.
Mm.
It is. It's much more volume, and that's partly because the Famille Vincent wines are further south, and they're in a much more sort of higher production, I guess, region, a little bit warmer. And then these guys are in Meursault, which is Meursault produces a much weightier style of Chardonnay. So it's much sort of fatter and weightier. And if you were trying to distinguish between the different regions, you've got Meursault is richer. Puligny, which is nearby, is super racy. It's got high acidity and lemony, citrusy fruit. I think they all have a sort of citrus spectrum. And then you've got Chassagne, which is a bit further south, which is spicy. So I find that often spicy with sort of baked apple-y type flavors, citrus.
Do
and
they
baked
tend to be
apple.
a bit honeyed as well, Laura?
Meursault?
No, I was thinking maybe it's just more the tag I give them in my mind, but they have almost, maybe it's your spicing, I don't know, like a slightly, I think sweet, but I don't want to use that word.
In Chassagne.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
Chassagne, they have this like, yeah, I kind of think of honeyed sort of profile.
Yeah,
to
I
it.
think they have a weight. They have a weight.
Yeah,
and
definitely,
spice
for
to
sure.
them, which is really nice. That was a famous walk that Nicola and I did. We did Meursault to Puligny to Chassagne, and then wondered why we were tired the next day. It was a really good walk, and then we had to walk back to the car.
I hope you had a bottle for each
We did
voyage as you
stop
went
at
through.
a little bar on the way, I have to confess. It was good fun.
I'd expect nothing less.
If you're ever in that neck of the woods, go to Puligny because it's so pretty. It's got a little sweet little square and lovely hotel, 2 nice hotels actually, and a really nice little bar. So highly recommended.
And Laura, isn't Pierre Henry is sort of one to watch of a young winemaker?
So we really think he is. I think he's pretty under the radar. And the trick with Burgundy is to find under the radar producers. We're working with a guy called Sébastien Cayat, who Nicola, I mean, she is brilliant at finding these things. And we were introduced by a journalist and by another grower to Sébastien Cayat. He has a domain called Domaine Cayat, and I think we were selling the first vintage at something like £200 for 6 bottles in bond. Now those wines are now selling on the secondary market for over £3,000 for 6 bottles.
Wow.
And it's actually caused a bit of it's great in that his wines are being recognized, but he doesn't really like that. He doesn't really want to have his wines with this really, I mean, it's a crazy price tag. So for us, what we'd much rather do is we're now selling those wines duty paid, because it's harder to sell on the secondary market if your wines are duty paid, because they lose their bonded passport, and they're now on allocation. I was talking to a girl this morning about, just before we sat an exam, and she said, we were talking about Burgundy, and she said, oh, have you heard of Lamy Cayat? And I said, well, yeah, we sort of are his agents in the UK. And she went, oh my God, you're going to be my new best friend. And I said, you'll have to buy an awful lot more wine from me before you can get some Lamy Cayat. Because it's crazy. She's from Hong Kong, and she said the prices there are mad. It's £1,000 a bottle there. So
And is it that good? Sorry, Laura, to jump. Is he really that good? When you actually open, you must have tasted it. Is it really that special to be worth that sort of?
It's a really good question. His wines are amazing. I mean, they are absolutely delicious. And if you put them next to other wines, you need to spend time with them. So actually a lot of I like decanting white wines because I think they really open up as you give them time. And I think his wines are really special. I don't think they're £1,000 a bottle special, but it's what people will pay for them. It's like Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. That's you have to be on an allocation system to get these. They are amazing wines, but they're partly priced like that because of the rarity. There's so little of them made. So it's you know, it's a rarity factor allied to a bit of hype, I guess, allied to really good quality. I mean, there are wines where it's sort of slightly emperor's new clothes, and we see these coming out every year, especially from, I'd say, maybe California, Bordeaux, all of these famous wine producing regions, Napa and Bordeaux in particular, where people just hedge their bets and they'll age their wine in sort of 7,000% new oak. You know, they'll just keep putting it through, but let's say 200% new oak. So they'll put their wine into 100% new oak, and then they'll take it out and they'll put it into another load of brand new barrels, which is a really expensive way of making wine. They're probably starting with very expensive fruit, but is it worth that much money? Don't think so. It's interesting. It's interesting to try these things, but I do think his wines are amazing, and I think as a benchmark in the region, I think he is probably right up there with as the best. I would say probably.
What's that name again, Laura?
Lamy Kayat, so Lamy, and then Kayat is Caillat.
Okay.
It's interesting, really interesting, and he's new. I mean, he's pretty new to the scene, so.
We should have a tasting in the office next time of Lamy Kayat wines.
Yes, please.
Sarah. First, you have to catch Andrew. We'll have to ask Sarah to butter him up.
He'll be delighted.
No, that's your first job as a woman in wine. Lamy Kayat tasting in the office.
Let's see if we can have one with supper, Sarah.
Yeah.
I'm on it.
Thank you.
So then you have your first red in the case is from Domaine Fontaine-Gagnac. And is anyone open this one? No.
No, I've opened them.
So here you've got, I don't know if you can see, I've got all of you sitting on my screen right over where Nicola is sitting perched in the corner. So you've got Céline Fontaine-Gagnac in the doorway. And then on the right hand side, you've got Nicola, who is, that's what it looks like when we go to a Burgundy tasting. We have to find any spot where we can sit and perch and balance our laptops, normally on a barrel, normally whilst you're trying to juggle a glass of wine and find a spittoon and try not to trip over anything in the cellar. And it's freezing. So Céline Fontaine-Gagnac, she is in Chassagne-Montrachet. She makes the most wonderful white wines. But she also makes she makes a Chassagne-Montrachet Rouge and also this Bourgogne Blanc, which in a very loosely translated French means chuck it all in together. So what she's doing is she's taking Pinot Noir grapes and Gamay grapes, and she's co-fermenting them. So Pinot Noir brings the sort of more serious side of the wine and the more, it's not a structured grape Pinot Noir. When you're tasting your reds, you'll find there aren't very big, strong tannins. It's red fruits and juicy and but it evolves very nicely, so it matures beautifully. And then Gamay is the Beaujolais grape, and it's more blue fruits and very light tannins and juicy and fruity. And so if you co-ferment them together and put them in the same wine, you get this very approachable, really delicious, early to drink red wine with low tannins, and it's an absolute joy. It's one of the most joyous wines that you can buy.
Laura, sorry, do you have to? I'm guessing you have to co-ferment for.
You don't have to co-ferment.
So you can vinify separately and then blend.
I think you can.
Is that allowed? I don't know. That's what I was asking.
I think the chuck it in together bit.
I mean, the whole kind of point. I understand.
Gets together and ferments together. So it's just a very joyful, moderate tannins or very low tannins. Actually, you can see I don't know if you can see Nicola. I don't know if you can move the pictures of all of us lot, but if you can see Nicola behind her, you've got a lovely map which really shows you how parcellated Burgundy is. So if you think of all these vineyards being handed down, father to son, and several daughters, father to son, several sons and a daughter, whatever, and then again by generation. Each of these little parcels that are marked out on the map behind Nicola are often subdivided again. So if you own a vineyard in a Premier Cru Chassagne-Montrachet vineyard, if you own vines in there, you may be sharing that vineyard with 30 other growers. So it's really interesting to see how it parcelates down, and so there's a lot of horse trading going on with grapes, and but really people at the top domains want to make want to make their wine with the vineyard name attached to it, and if they're putting a vineyard name onto it, it has to come from that vineyard.
Surely that can't continue, because it'll get in, you know, hundreds of years time, it'll get to be like each person owns one vine or something.
Well, it's been going on for a
birth
long
rates
time.
have gone down.
Sorry.
Yeah, death rates are down. Excuse me, but also, I think a lot of people, if you get a tiny portion of a vineyard and you think, you know, do I really want to farm that? Then you'll sell it, or you'll lease it, or so I think there's a I mean, it's a really intricate business of making sure that, you know, the growers have the grapes that they want, and they're able to, or producers. There's also a big negociant business in Burgundy where they, you know, people buy grapes or juice. So if you have a particularly big vineyard that's not in we're talking about really the premium areas of Burgundy, but if you have a big vineyard where, you know, you're producing a lot of fruit, you could sell your fruit off to a negociant or to another grower. And you have negociants who don't own any vineyards, but they buy fruit or juice, and they make wine under their name. But you can always spot that, because on the on a bottle, for example, which, having said that, they don't say it here. They've got the Thierry Pascal Macho. Normally it would say Domaine in front of it. This is weird because they don't say it either, and it doesn't say it on my Macho de Grammont one either. But normally they say Domaine in front of it. So if they have a Domaine and a negociant, so Domaine Favely, for example, who are a big grower and a negociant, you can spot their own vineyards. It'll say Domaine Favely, and if it's a negociant wine where they're buying in the fruit and making it from other people's fruit or other people's juice, they'll just call it Favely or Favely Negoce or something like that. So
Some of them also just have two trading names.
yeah,
So you might have, like, I don't know, I can't actually think of an example, so I'm just going to use a Burgundian name like Bouchard Pierre Fils. So they are a negociant. So, but they may, for example, just trade as, like, I don't know, Pierre Bouchard. That doesn't exist. So, and that would be Pierre Bouchard would be their own vines, and then Bouchard Pierre Fils will be the negociant. So it's a minefield. It's so hard to figure out who's growing what.
Also, like, don't mention the family as well, because sometimes
that too.
fall out with their cousins or something, and so there's a lot of don't mention the family.
And what sort of, sorry, on the pastogram, they don't have to say what blend of Gamay.
They don't have to say, no, they don't have to say anything. They
would
have
be
to,
tied at Gamay, wouldn't it?
there's another wine that we do, which is about 50-50 Bourgogne Pinot Noir Gamay. I think it's normally roughly 50-50. But it just depends on the vintage, I think, depending on how ripe the vintage is, because if you're putting Gamay in with Pinot Noir, Gamay is a much more earlier ripening, it's much more blue fruits. If you're putting it in with Pinot Noir and it's a really hot vintage, you'll probably want more Pinot Noir than you'll want Gamay, because the Pinot Noir will give it more freshness. And then if you're got a cooler vintage, the Gamay will give it more juiciness and more sort of body to the wine. So yeah, it's a movable feast. As with any blend, actually, we had a Du Cru Bouquet tasting today, which was fascinating, and they do all of their, so Du Cru Bouquet is in Bordeaux and Saint-Julien, and they do all of their blending blind. And we had the 2021 vintage, and it was 98% Cabernet Sauvignon, which is really unusual for them. It normally has a lot more Merlot and Merlot in the blend. They don't have any other vines in the Grand Vin. And it wasn't until they were doing the fiche technique after the technical sheets, after the wine had been made. And Tracy went to Bruno Borry and said, did you realize it was 98% Cabernet Sauvignon? He said, no, I didn't have a clue, because they actually blend on taste and flavor rather than to a recipe. So the year before, it might have been, 78% Cabernet Sauvignon. It just happened that in 2021, because it was a cooler vintage, they didn't want, as much. The grape, and also the grapes were better quality because they literally had half the harvest because they'd done such a massive green harvest. So they had low yields, high quality fruit, and the blend was completely different to the year before, which makes it always a little bit tricky when you're blind tasting things. And anyway, on to the lovely Macho sisters, who you have all met. Some of you have met on Zoom. They joined us for one of our very first Women in Wine tastings. I've got their Pinot Noir here, so you can see it. Pinot Noir is pretty pale in colour if you've got a Pinot in front of you. So it's quite a good marker if you're ever looking at wondering what a wine is. Other pale grapes are things like Nebbiolo, but that's very high in tannins, and Pinot Noir is not high in tannins. As you'll see, it's very easy to drink, it's very juicy, it's and this I think is just another really joyful wine. So their Domaine is most famous for making Meursault. They're based in the village of Meursault. The girls took over from their father a few years ago. They've been really working on the red wines, so they've been lifting the aromatics of the red wines, making them in a much more approachable way, not using so much wood, very clean winemaking. And I think this is just a gorgeous, juicy Pinot Noir. Also comes in screw cap, which I think is quite handy. No screw required.
Love easy access.
Yeah.
Delicious.
And
So
I think this is a great entry level wine. They do a Meursault Rouge, of which we were allocated 2 cases this year for our entire allocation. But we work a lot with their Meursault, their Premier Cru Meursault, they do a delicious Saint-Romain, which I really recommend from down south. So I really recommend for, excuse me, good value, a really good value, well-made wine. Their Bourgogne Blanc has, because they're based in Meursault, has a lot of Meursault fruit in the wine. And interestingly, because I didn't realize this was happening until Nicola and I visited them recently, but in the blend, they're actually putting fruit from Chablis in there and fruit from different regions to freshen it up. And because it's a village wine, it's a village wine, and it's not linked to any particular cru or Premier Cru, they're able to do that. They're able to source grapes from around the region. And so what they're doing is, if they have a particularly hot year and their Meursault is really fat and ripe and sugary and is going to give them too high alcohol or too much body, and actually, quite frankly, is so good it needs to go into Meursault, they will pop in grapes from different regions, which is different appellations, within Burgundy. And if you want more freshness, you go up to the north to Chablis and you put Chablis grapes into your Bourgogne village. If you want more richness, you'll go further south and put grapes from the more southern regions in. And this, famously, they wash, sorry.
So Laura, so when you say, just to clarify, when you say Meursault grapes, you're talking about Chardonnay grapes that are grown in Meursault.
Exactly, thank you, yes. So the Meursault appellation is one of the most prestigious and premium appellations for white wine. And so they have vineyards across the region, and they're able to source from their own vines. And then the ones that the other grapes that they put in, maybe from their own vineyards. So they may go to Saint-Romain for their own vines, for example, or if they're going up to Chablis, they're probably buying fruit.
That's only for their Bourgogne Blanc.
Just for their Bourgogne Blanc.
Yeah.
And they famously use very little new oak on their Grand Vin, on their big wines. They prefer to let the grape do the talking. So they use a lot of second fill oak, which is more neutral in flavour. They're using a bit of stainless steel now. And they used to always say that they washed out their new barrels with the Bourgogne Blanc. So they just put their Bourgogne Blanc into the new barrels for a short amount of time. And it gives it this lovely weight and body, but it's not in there for a long time. And it also means that they can then use their barrels for the next vintage of Meursault or whatever it is that they want to use, a sort of more neutral oak. Because new oak imparts quite a lot of flavour to a wine, so you want to use it quite sparingly.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So the Burgundy appellation is by area, is that right? Not vineyard as it is in Bordeaux. But are there restrictions when you're saying that they're taking grapes from different areas around the larger area? Are there any restrictions on that when they are coming to sort of adhere to their appellation?
So, so good question. So Burgundy refers to the whole area, that north, all the way from the north of, Chablis, all the way down to the Mâconnais. So that sort of refers to Burgundy. So if you're making a Burgundy village, you can pretty much use any grapes from within the appellation boundary. If you're putting a vineyard name onto your label, it has to be from that vineyard. And if you're putting a cru or an appellation, so if, for example, on Axel's wine, it's got Nuits Saint-Georges, so that's the appellation. So the grapes have to come from Nuits Saint-Georges. Les Terrasses de Vallereau is the lieu dit, so they have to come from that particular part. She's putting it on the label. They have to come from that vineyard. If I was trying to think of another example, if you had, so if you had, I don't know, Meursault Premier Cru Les Perrières, it has to come from that particular delimited vineyard. In fact, behind Becca, I don't know if you're able to twist it, the map of Burgundy. And the parcels are minute, some of them.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it really doesn't like it when I move it.
Sorry, that's my fault. But the parcels within the appellation. So if you have Gevrey Chambertin, it's divided up into lots of little vineyards. But some of them are just village vineyards, and other ones are Premier Cru. The Premier Cru vineyards are traditionally the ones that were better. They are the better vineyards, and so you can't say it's Chablis Premier, it's Gevrey Chambertin Premier Cru or Nuits Saint-Georges if it's not from a Premier Cru vineyard. So it has to be from that literally delimited area of vines. But that vineyard could be owned by 20 people. How they ever know which is their vineyard, I don't know. But anyway, I do. And then the last, your little mini bottle that I sent you is from, and I've just realized that what we must do in our next offer scales is put Domaine Bertrand et Axel de Marchal de Gramont, because she's actually on the label. So Axel, who's pictured here with Nicola on our tour of the terroir, is absolutely wonderful. She also came to our Burgundy masterclass, and I just love their wines. She's very. I'm gonna now that we've seen everybody and seen all the people, I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see you. It's better. Axel, she came to the masterclass, and she said, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed because I don't have any posh wines. I don't have any Grand Cru or Premier Cru, or I've just got normal wines." And I said, "Well, that they'll speak for themselves. It's fine." And actually, her wines are. I don't know if you find this, but I'm not drinking my nose with tooth mug, and I'm going to drink this one so I can actually drink it out of a proper glass. Bear with.
No, don't worry. We noticed you had the full bottle there.
I know, because I decanted all of them, and I ended up with a little. I did actually do myself a little thingy as well.
Oh.
I'm drinking my mini, but I did have some left over. And I hope it may have got a little bit of shock traveling through the post for you, but her wines are so perfumed. And I think they're so delicious. They really are. Her father is Bertrand, and they have these, tiny parcels of vineyards. And even though, again, that Bourgogne Rouge is not an expensive wine, but it is effectively a Nuits Saint-Georges. So their vines are all based in Nuits Saint-Georges. They're not buying in fruit from anywhere else. They have several times. I remember Nicola and I went to go and visit her once, and she had this one of her vineyards, Les Barreaux, which is the one that was really successful at the masterclass, and we had to split it down into 6 bottle cases instead of 12 bottle cases because so many people wanted some. And we went to see her, and she had this tank, which wasn't a massive tank, but it was only half full because that was all the fruit she could harvest in 2021. So yeah, 2021 was really hard on them. She's actually combated a lot of the problems with hail, for example, by not really savagely pruning her vines. So they're all growing up. The vines are growing. The vines grow like weeds. They grow really quickly. If they weren't trained and pruned and trellised, they'd be taking over the world. And so she actually stopped pruning at the top, and the overgrowth of the vines stop the hailstones getting in to damage her fruit.
Mm.
So
Working with nature, eh?
exactly. Well, actually, she didn't really do it on purpose. She just didn't have time to go out there. There were so many other things to do in the vineyard that she didn't have time to go out there and do it. So she said it was just really lucky that she stumbled across a way to protect her vines. But then it's a sort of fine line between having the overgrowth and then a canopy. If you have a big canopy and it's damp, that's where disease and mildew and things can sort of start forming. So you definitely don't want that. You want air to get through into the bunches of your grapes and things and into your vines, stop mildew forming. And then if you have once your fruit starts to ripen, you need to get rid of some of the canopy because you want some sunshine to get in to ripen the fruit. But you don't want to get rid of too much so your fruit doesn't get overripe or sunburnt. So it's quite a fine line. There's a lot of canopy management that goes on. But I really love her wines, and we thought it would be nice to put in a spoily wine, which is why you got such a mini sample. But it's they have Nuits Saint-Georges Les Valereaux and Nuits Saint-Georges Terrasse de Valereaux, which is something that they've built themselves. So because the slope is quite steep, and they were finding that it was very difficult to farm, and the vines, there's a lot of soil erosion. They've actually turned it into terraces, but they are literally, you get one little terrace, which is a step with a little part of a vineyard, and then there's another terrace and another part. So obviously that can't be, you can't get machines in there. It's all got to be hand tended, hand harvested. So it's really like a garden. It's like a sort of decent sized garden where she's making these extraordinary wines and tiny quantities. So so I hope you're enjoying this one. So this again is 100% grape variety. Pinot Noir.
It's so much darker than the one that I opened, which was the Matro Pinot Noir.
It's much darker. Yeah, it's much darker, and that's two reasons. One is 2020 vintage, which are they both 2020? What's the Matro?
The Matro one is 2021.
Yeah, so it's 2020 vintage, so a bit of a riper vintage, so darker skins anyway. It's also from further north, so so the grapes there are much more tannic and because it's further north and it's a little bit cooler. The grapes get they ripen a little bit later, and the skins have much more time to darken. But also it's in the winemaking. So the Matro girls are making their wine. So when you bring in the grapes, if you just squash the grapes and made juice, you'd get white wine, because if you cut a red grape in half, there's white juice inside. So what the Matro girls are doing is they're having a very short time of sort of mushing up the skins and the juice to get a paler wine but less tannin. So all of your tannins, the things that dry outside of your mouth, they're all in the skins of the grapes, skins and pips of the grapes. So they're not spending a lot of time on the skins of the grapes. They're having a cold soak, so to get some color out of the grapes and some fruit, and then they're fermenting it really quite quickly, and then maturing it and putting it into bottle. Whereas this one, they'll give it a much more of a soak before they start the fermentation. And then when they start the fermentation, all the skins and everything is mixed in with in the vat or the barrel where they're fermenting it, and they rise to the top. And as they rise to the top, what they'll do is they'll pump the juice over the top so it filters back down through the skins, and then you get more color and more extraction. Or you can just push the cap down, so the cap will naturally rise, because carbon dioxide is a byproduct of fermentation, and the bubbles will push the cap up to the top. So what you want to do is push it back down under the juice to get more. And do you remember Matt? So those of you who met Matt, who lost his wedding ring in the or the Aristea story of Matt, who lost his wedding ring in the vat and had to wait for all the fermentations to take place before he could get it back again. So he does hand punch downs, but you can get, you can do it with a sort of puncheon thing, or you can do it by pumping juice over, by pumping juice over. And yeah, it's so Axel will be doing more of that to get more out of her grapes, because this goes into barrel and it needs a bit more sort of fruit and structure to go before it goes into barrel to mature. So so that's a very, very quick canter through Burgundy, and I'm sorry I was late because I'm busy trying to wrestle my way through Italian grape varieties. So has anyone got any questions or questions about the wines, or is there a particular favourite? Who's had a have you tried them all?
So far, mine is the Matro Pinot Noir. I haven't tried them all, but even versus the more expensive Nuit Saint Georges, I think the Matro one is delicious, lighter and oakier.
It's more ready as well, I think, isn't it? Whereas the Nuit Saint Georges, so as Burgundy develops, so the Matro you probably wouldn't really want to age because it won't really. There's not really enough fruit in there to. It's delicious now, and there's not enough fruit and structure in there for it to age for a long time. I think with Axel's wine, it's definitely got the structure and the material to age, and as it ages, it will take on much more sort of secondary and tertiary flavors. So it will take on more gamey flavors and earthy flavors, little savouriness from the oak, but she always has this lovely perfume, which may have been lost a little bit in your little mini samples after they hurled their way through the post.
I think the Nuit Saint Georges, sorry, is absolutely delicious. You on your tasting notes, you talk about the brambly leafy note, and you really get the blackberry flavour from it. I think it's really amazing. I really, really like it.
Oh, good. And it's very dark fruit, isn't it? So I was thinking with Pinot Noir, it's sort of red fruits, but it is brambly. It's very blackberry almost.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
Definitely.
I'm looking forward to tasting mine tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I did send you one.
No, I know, Laura. That's not your fault. I'm blaming
It's
the
somewhere
postman.
in the office. I think Andrew's nicked it. Andrew's run
Well,
off.
Andrew's taking it. Yeah, and Andrew's run off with
I've
it.
got this little bit left for you, Becca,
Oh,
when you get in.
So those of you who
Maybe
don't
Andrew
know,
did just
Becca's
take it. No, it's I don't know, but yeah, that's
It's delicious.
really funny. So those of you who don't know, Becca's in the office, and that's next door to Andrew and Sarah's house. So they're having.
So
dinner
yeah, I go
together.
over for supper.
Juliet, did you have the Grand Goutte?
I did this.
Or the
Yes,
Famille
I was.
Grand Goutte?
I've polished it off myself quite after
Did you like it?
everything's been. Yeah, I do actually. Thank you very much. And also, this, as you said, this was a real treat to
Oh,
have, as I'm in a house full of children who don't ever think about me, and so that was really kind, and I'm really looking forward to my little soup song a little bit later.
oh, that's
So
nice.
thank you.
That's nice.
Thank you.
So does anyone have any questions before we all?
Yes, I have, Laura. How
Hmm.
would this Fontaine Gano, how is that going to age?
So that again, it's I think it's drinking really well now. I think a Passe du Grain is definitely made for early drinking because it has the whole idea of it is that it has lighter tannins, and they might do a little part of it. They might do as a carbonic maceration. So what they'll do is they'll take the berries and they'll leave them whole, but they'll put them into a tank, and then they'll allow the fermentation to start within the berries of the grapes, and that creates this really fresh blue fruit, and just and very soft. It just creates this really lovely soft blue fruit. So I would drink it now and probably for maybe 3 years, but I wouldn't leave it much longer than that.
Okay. Thank
Whereas the Nuit Saint Georges, you could leave for good. You could leave that before you even drank it for another 3 or 4 years, and leave it for another 5 or 6 after that.
Do you mind if I add something, Laura?
Don't mind at all.
Is that okay?
I love it when you add something.
And please correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, but I think the story behind the Passe du Grain is kind of an interesting one, because once upon a time, actually, there was a lot of once upon a time, we're talking hundreds of years ago, there was a lot of Gamay planted in Burgundy, where there is now essentially none. And then I can't remember if it was a duke or a king or whomever basically outlawed Gamay, being like, it is a scourge upon, like a scourge rather upon, the vineyards. And so they got rid of it an awful lot. but it was once really, really prevalent, and particularly in the southern part of Burgundy and the Mâconnais, less so up in the Côte de Nuit and the Côte d'Or, although some is planted, but quite frankly, you can make more money planting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, so why would you plant the cheaper variety? But in a climate as north as that, where sometimes, and less so now, but more historically in the last 100 years, it was much harder to ripen Pinot Noir. If you had this slightly earlier ripening variety of Gamay, which had lower tannin, and if you were able to blend that with your Pinot Noir in a really cool vintage, which could be a bit austere and really tannic and, well, by Pinot Noir standards, and just not very nice, it allowed you to produce, it kind of gave you this flexibility to produce the wine and to make something that was quaffable and drinkable and tasty. And so it was, in some ways, it's kind of like, to put it crudely, it was kind of like an insurance policy, but a very delicious one. And so, yeah, the wines, the reason I say this is the wines were, so I suppose, it's very much a different style, and now people do it very, very well. But to kind of like throw it all together, they kind of mix it all up. If you might have had a bit of a vineyard where you knew you couldn't necessarily ripen all of your Pinot Noir, so you plant a bit of Gamay, literally harvest it all together, dump it in your whatever you were going to ferment it in, and then just make it on the fly. But yeah, it allowed you to produce a wine that was drinkable and easygoing. And I suppose that's, not necessarily.
I think they are. They're really joyful wines. They're super
duper tasty. But yeah, that's kind of what they're sort of about. It's about just enjoying it and drinking it rather than aging it.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think it's definitely not one for aging. But there's so much more to discover in Burgundy, so don't stop there on your discovery of Burgundy. Do have a look at other crus, and if you the problem is just being able to afford it at the moment. So Burgundy got very expensive, largely through really, really short vintages. So we've just had a really lovely, bountiful, big, good vintage. So let's hope that the next vintage is the same and prices will start coming down and we'll all be able to afford to drink Burgundy again.
Hurrah.
Hurrah!
I drink
Oh
that.
my God.
I think you're really in the flow, having come straight from your MW.
Oh my God, I got black teeth. I came from a
can't see.
very dishy Italian blokes, which is why I was a little bit late. There were only 2 Italian MWs and they were both in the room. It was very exciting.
And Emily was swooning with you.
I was like, I had to run. I was like, Lucy, can you just clear away my glasses? I felt like a complete and utter sort of fraud. But yeah, so no, it's full on. It's exciting, but it's full on. So we start every day with a 12 wine blind tasting, and then today we had a lecture on Du Cru Bourgogne. Oh, then after the blind tasting, you have to have your ritual humiliation and read out your answers in front of the class, which is always embarrassing. We had 6 vintages of Du Cru Bourgogne and their second wines, which was amazing, and then a full on California tasting, which actually something you said, Becca, was quite interesting, because they were saying, we had Grenache and they said, well, Grenache wouldn't be from, and it was American tasting, and they said Grenache wouldn't be from Napa, because why would you plant Grenache when you can get so much money for Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley? And then we had the Italian tasting, and here I am. So
well done.
Anyway.
One thing I must say is all the bottles do look so good, don't they, from Burgundy?
They look really nice and traditional, don't they?
Stylish.
Really nice.
There's no gimmicky label or.
No, I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I think they look smart. They are traditional. I think Burgundy is modernizing, and there are lots of lovely, really fun, like Axel and Pierre Henri, really fun people coming through, and the macho girls, just coming through and creating amazing wines and changing up, shaking things up a bit, which is fun, but it is ultimately a very traditional region. So
and will those young wine producers maintain that tradition of using Pinot Noir and Gamay and Chardonnay? Is that a good grape for the area, so they'll keep with that?
I think they are the grapes that work best in that area. So through history has taught us that. So a lot of grapes have been planted and then eliminated. it takes a really long time to change appellation law. You know, for example, they're not allowed to put, they fought for years to put up hail nets to help save their vintage. So it was only recently they're allowed to use hail nets, which most people don't use, but just having the option to be able to put a net up to just get the hailstones are like the size of golf balls. So just have the option to be able to put a net up. But then, you know, they'll say, does that change the microclimate of the vineyard? And are we now changing the characteristic of Burgundy by putting up hail nets? And so everything takes time and money, and there's a whole process to go through. So I don't think anything will change anytime soon. But that said, they're experimenting with different varieties in Bordeaux for climate change. So drought
There's potential that aligoté will be used more widely.
Hopefully it'll gain a bit more weight and sugar rather than acid.
Yeah, true. But with climate change coming, well, I mean, it's here. There's a large certainly a group of people within Burgundy who are campaigning for much higher permitted quantities of aligoté to be used with Chardonnay in something, for example, like a Meursault, and what I mean by that is a village level wine, a Meursault or a Puligny, Montrachet or whatever, as opposed to your Bourgogne Blanc, to allow to retain an acidity and a backbone to the wines that climate change essentially is putting at risk. Historically, they have been blended and they've been grown together an awful lot. But again, typically, like, just to be really, really clear, everything in your glass tonight is Chardonnay. But yeah, so it's the younger generations, they can't change. They won't be allowed. The rules of the appellation don't allow them to. But yeah, like Laura said, they change at like
interesting. I've spoken to so many people recently. Yeah, I was speaking to an Amarone producer the other day, and he was saying that, you know, yes, climate change is happening and everything's getting warmer, but actually there have been these natural cycles, and they have had massively hot years in the past. So, you know, they may have another cold year. I think it's actually more extreme. So you either get a really hot year or a really cold year or a really dry year or a really wet year. I mean, look at all the rain we've had recently. It's not like climate change is a linear thing where we're just getting hotter and drier. We're just getting more extreme. I mean, we've had so much rain in the last few weeks that isn't, you know, if climate change was linear, we wouldn't have had any rain. We've just been getting hotter, and it would have been, you know, so I think we have to think of it as a cycle. And so I don't think things will change particularly, but, you know, as I say, in Bordeaux, they are planting, you know, even Portuguese varieties in Bordeaux where you're allowed to put up to 5% of different varieties into your final blend, which people are starting to experiment with. But I don't think we'll see it. I mean, it is really experimental. So
it's kind of what you love about the French, isn't it? That they've got to maintain their character, you know, where the rest of the world has risen up around them, and, you know, once they kind of had the monopoly, they had the respect and they had everything, and now the rest of the world is building up around them. I kind of love the way that they hold their guns and don't dilute their thing, but equally they kind of have to as well, don't they? So it's quite a fine balance, I think.
I think it's a real opportunity for the other regions, actually. So the regions that aren't so highly controlled, so southern France, you know, so parts of southern France, they can create these amazing wines that are very similar to, you know, to other wines around the world, but are selling at much higher prices. So I think it's an opportunity for the other regions in a way. Lucky for Burgundy, there's so little of it, and it's pretty scarce still. So anyway, I should let you all go. You're probably hungry.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get some.
Thank you, Laura. That was really good.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's lovely to see you.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Really,
well, I hope to see
really.
you all soon in person. And once I get out of my little boarding school, I'm just gonna remind you how lovely it is here, my little boarding school bed.
Oh my goodness.
Best of luck with it.
Only a couple more days to go.
Yeah.
Oh, good luck.
All right, well, listen,
Bye.
have a good rest of your week, and we'll catch up soon.
Will do.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.